Great. So good afternoon. Thanks for everybody who's joined us already for the International Women's Day event today on the 7th of March. My name is Hamid Vatragi. I'm the Director of Health Equity Inclusion at the North East North Cumbria Integrated Care Board, and we're joined by several colleagues today for a discussion about their careers and how they've inspired inclusion across their career and what other things have inspired them as women within the workplace. I'll be introducing speakers in just a moment, but to let you know, the session is actually going to be recorded. So if you need to step out at any point, please do. You can always come back to it later. We'll be circulating around the recording afterwards. And what I'll also ask you to do at some point is to actually to fill in our survey that we'll send around. We're very keen to get feedback from people and to understand if the events are useful, what they'd like to hear in the future. And that helps us shape the events that we put out and the different activities that we put out there for you. So if you like it, tell us. If you don't like it, also tell us. Don't just sit on the fence. The feedback's really, really welcome as well. So I'll start in just a moment with a few introductions of our speakers, but just to let you know, it is International Women's Day tomorrow. There's another event as well, which is hosted by our colleagues at the NHS Confed. You're more than welcome to join that. We can put the link to join that for tomorrow's event as well. It goes on in the morning. It features our Chief Executive of the ICB, Sam Allen, some other brilliant speakers, Amanda Pritchard from NHS England's there, and you'll see me again. I'm partaking in a panel on male allyship, which is incredibly important as well, because we do need men to be involved in the conversation to support women as well at the same time. It can't just be one gender carrying all the hard work. So I'm not going to drag this on far longer, but what I'll do is I'll introduce our first speaker, Teresa Griffiths, who I'm delighted to have here. She's currently one of the NEDs at North Cumbria Integrated Care, but she's had a really fantastic career, which we'll talk about in a moment. But just to give you a quick flavour, she did 27 years in the RAF, which is incredible. She was involved in breaking the glass ceilings in so many different ways, worked overseas, worked during the Ebola crisis, during COVID. I mean, the list is absolutely endless. So how she has time to even be with us today is an incredible feat in its own right. But Teresa, if I can hand over to you for your presentation, because I'm sure colleagues really want to hear from you, and thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you. I'll just share. Typical, it's not working now. Oh, here you go. That button's not working again.
Okay.
Let me try and let me go and come out and come again.
No problem at all. No problem at all. These things happen, but I know you've got a wonderful presentation lined up for us, so we're prepared to take a bit more time until we get it up and running. But again, just to let you know, we've got some other speakers involved today, a lady called Jackie McBurney, who's the ICB menopause lead, and we also have another colleague joining us later on, Karen Gardner from NIAS. So Teresa, I'm going to hand back to you if that's okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Is my presentation up now?
Yep, you can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. So I can't see you, so I'm really sorry. So I really find this difficult when you can't see your audience. But thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I was asked to tell my story because it's different. I find it very boring and I hate talking about myself. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is share my story through my leadership journey, because I find that easier to talk about. But what I'd like to do is to start off this afternoon by telling you a story. So I'd like to take you back to 2005, and you are in one of the most volatile and dangerous places in the world to be, Baghdad in Iraq. You're the military nurse responsible for looking after 300 UK soldiers, and there's no doctor. Whilst in Baghdad, they are your soldiers, and you will do anything for them to protect them. You live in a 3-mile by 3-mile protected zone in the centre of Baghdad called the Green Zone. Bullets constantly ping off the corrugated metal roof, and it's a complete lottery where the mortars land. IEDs inflicting horrific trauma and death are detonated every hour in the red zone. And in the American combat hospital just down the road, their only wish is that today will be the day that no American soldiers die. But today is not that day. and multiple civilians and soldiers are already lying in the hospital corridors, children orphaned. There is blood everywhere. You see, it isn't really a safe place. And when you drive around, you have a loaded pistol in the glove pocket and you have to check under your vehicle for bombs before you start your car. But it's 1600 hours and time to start your clinic. The sun is shining and Jar Jar, the pet ginger goat, bleats as you cross the parched yellow grass. Suddenly, there's a sound of gunfire, lots of it splintering the air. But today, it sounds like that it's on your side of the river, only meters away. You grab your body armor, you throw your helmet on, you run to the guard room, because that's the SOP. The small space is already full. And without warning, the gunfire is replaced with the loudest explosion that you've ever heard. Seconds after the noise, the blast wave hits a small brick building, and you watch as the walls expand out and then recede back in. Time stops still, and you're thinking this is the end. Shortly, everyone will be buried under the bricks and masonry. A further explosion is followed by secondary blast waves. The bricks continue to expand out and recede in, but miraculously, the building doesn't collapse. Everyone has the same look of terror on their face, pupils wide. A cement lorry filled with huge volumes of explosives has just crashed into the hotel 500 meters across the river from you. White dust covers everyone like ghosts, and you start coughing. Suddenly, one of the young soldiers looks at you, and in his broad Irish accent, he says, "Gosh, I'm so glad you're here, Mom." And the room is filled with echoes of "Me too, me too, me too." Inside, you're still shaking from what has happened, but you're really, really confused. Why on earth has your presence reassured these soldiers? You're just the nurse. Then the same voice asks, "What do we do now, Mom?" So Field Marshal Slim said, "You will find in a difficult situation, there will come a pause when everything will stop. Doesn't matter whether you're commanding a section or an army, there will come a pause when everyone will look at you, and they will look at you for leadership." And this was my day when I realized when I was more than a nurse, more than the squadron leader rank I wore on my sleeve, and that I was somehow now a leader. In truth, my bosses and peers had already recognized my leadership ability and potential, but this was the first time that I saw the leader in me. But it wasn't, I never set out to be a leader. And my leadership journey started in 1969 at the age of 4, as in this photograph, when I declared at Christmas to my parents that I wanted to be a nurse. And in 1988, my dream came true when I qualified as a registered nurse at St Bartholomew's Hospital. After qualifying, I specialised as a neuro intensive care nurse at Queen Square before moving to Oxford, where I was promoted to my first sister's job. But in 1993, I recognised that I needed more, I needed a greater challenge. And after a particularly bad shift, I found myself in the RAF Careers Office. So, as Hamid said, my military career lasted 27 years. I started back in 1993 as a flying officer, and I finished my career in 2020 as a rank of a group captain. For those of you in the military who are unaware of the RAF, that's the equivalent of a full colonel. But I never expected to achieve this rank. In the military, you always have 2 jobs. You have an 8 to 5, well, sort of 8 to 5 day job, and a deployed military shadow job. And in your day job, you usually move around every 2-3 years. I'm not going to go through all of these on here, but this is just a flavour of the type of roles that I undertook. In my first sort of 10 to 15 years of my career, I was very much focused on being clinical facing and training roles. And as you would expect, as a RAF nurse, I became trained as a specialist aeromedical evacuation nurse. I deployed on multiple operations, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. But I was very lucky to be given many unique and different opportunities. And one of my highlights was when I was chosen and headhunted to be the medical planner at our permanent joint headquarters, where I was responsible for planning the medical plan for our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. This had huge responsibility because you were actually responsible for how many hospitals, where those hospitals went, how much blood, what consultants, and it all had to fit into the doctrinal time concepts of that military operation. And your decision making actually fed the decision making often at number 10. So there was a lot of sleepless nights. However, the golden thread throughout all of the roles that I undertook was leadership. And as a female and as a nurse, I did break many glass ceilings, but never ever intentionally. But I did realise that the positive impact that this had was that it gave confidence to my peers and juniors that they could do the same. However, it was the deployed space where I really thrived and where my leadership was really founded, and I think probably made some of the greatest impact. From the years 2000 to 2006, I deployed in total to 6 different countries and 6 different operations, and totaling 28 months away, which is just shy of 2.5 years. And the remainder of that time, I was sitting at 24 hours notice to move when I commanded the RAF's High Readiness Medical Squadron. The environments were frequently austere, hostile and dangerous, but again, that's where I thrived. And I experienced temperature extremes as cold as -20, which you can see in Kosovo there, and to +63 in places like Kuwait and in Iraq. I deployed in many leadership roles. One of the constant ones was always something called the Aeromedical Evacuation Liaison Officer, huge title, but basically you were the Aeromed specialist nurse on the ground that coordinated all of the evacuation in the aircraft incoming, and also making sure that the patients were fit to fly, because altitude does very strange things to the body at 38,000 feet. I also undertook a number of primary healthcare roles, and in the Iraq War, I was the detachment commander for our Aeromed holding facility, which was like the medical facility right at the end of the CIV. And we had 2 massive VC-10 aircraft come in every 12 hours to evacuate the casualties. And just like you struggle in the NHS, we always had to make sure that all of our hospitals had capacity, because if we didn't have capacity, then our war had to stop. So it was absolutely essential we got our patients out. All of this required really creative thinking and very sound leadership to achieve the mission. And 2 out of the deployments that I actually went on, I was actually told before I went that I probably wouldn't come home. But it wasn't just in the deployed space where I was required to lead. And one of my probably greatest highlights was in Birmingham, where I was posted as the military chief nurse in 2010 to 2013. And I was deployed to something called the Role 4, which is a capability at the end of the military evacuation chain based in the UK. And it's the receiving hospital for all military casualties coming from overseas. And it's jointly delivered by the NHS and the MOD. The NHS is responsible for the delivery of the clinical care, and the MOD, the big military wraparound to support the patients. And between 2008 and 2013, you'll probably remember, and probably saw it on television, that there were unprecedented numbers of casualties coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq with unprecedented life-changing trauma, often involving 10 or more different specialities. My role was pivotal. And on day 2, it became very apparent that I had the wrong name. In the military terms, I was called Officer Commanding Nursing, but that meant absolutely nothing. So on the 2nd day, I changed my military title to the Military Matron, with the being as important as Military Matron. For my NHS colleagues, I was known as the Military Chief Nurse. But to the rest of the military, I needed to be the Military Matron, because I needed to make sure that I could advocate for our patients and provide that control and that ethos that was required. The second thing I did on that 2nd day was that I got out of my blue staff uniform and went into the uniform that you see, into my nursing uniform, because it became very apparent that I needed to be the role model for all of my nurses and for all of the other allied health professionals that I led. And the third thing that I instigated was a matron's ward round every week, where I spoke to every single one of the patients and their families, and I was accompanied by one of my junior nurses who I expected to brief me on the whole of the holistic care for the patient, not just their physical needs. And on those ward rounds, I required all my patients to be shaved, to have short haircut, to have a tidy bed space, to eat fruit, and not to wear orange pajamas, because 18-year-old boys do not wear orange pajamas. And over the 3 years, I created an empowered military nursing workforce that was really able to advocate for our military patients. But more importantly, I was so proud that some of my most junior corporals and some of my most junior nurses felt confident and confident enough at the end of my tenure to be able to challenge the consultants in an MDT where there was often more than 75 people. But my penultimate challenge before leaving the RAF was commanding officer of the Defence Medical Rehab Centre down at Headley Court. And the commanding officer is a similar title to chief exec in the NHS. And again, a bit of a trend, I was the first nurse at my rank to be selected to command this amazing world-class unit. But also on my watch, I had the unenviable task of having to relocate it to its new home in Loughborough. And it had many, many, many challenges because firstly, it was a vision of the late Duke of Westminster. Prince William was the patron, so there was huge royal scrutiny. And guess what? If you have royal scrutiny, you have ministerial scrutiny. And if you have ministerial scrutiny, you have a lot of senior officer scrutiny. And everybody believed that this was a mission too far and that it was not possible. It was a £300 million programme, so a massive, massive programme. And it was also identified at the time as being the most challenging and complex change programme in defence. It was complicated because the two units were 137 miles apart. And I also had to close and open both units with no additional resource at the same time because that had been decided before I took command. And another challenge was to have to recruit 300 new staff to support the new unit that you can see in the picture at the bottom. The leadership challenges were absolutely immense, but through incredible teamwork and leadership at all levels, we actually achieved the impossible. So unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about what leadership is or to go into my normal sort of presentation on leadership. But if I had to find a quote about what leadership is, this is my favourite. And it's a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He, she does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his or her actions and the integrity of his or her intent. And I don't think you can go far wrong if you look at the attributes for leadership. So in 2020, I left the RAF. I had achieved everything I needed to achieve, and my raison d'etre in life is to make a difference. So I decided to leave. I left somehow, and I still don't quite know why, as one of the most decorated military nurses in the last 40 years. And as Hamid said, I have broke many glass ceilings, all unintentionally, both as a female and a nurse. I became the leader I wanted to be and needed to be, but more importantly, created a leadership style based on compassionate leadership that I really believe works. And most importantly, the RAF gave me the opportunity to challenge myself to be the best version of myself that I could be. Since leaving, I've tried to continue using my leadership skills and my experience. So as again, Hamid said, I'm currently the non-executive director for NCIC. I'm also chair of a national Nurse Lifeline charity and trustee of a number of other charities. And I'm also just starting my own company in becoming an executive leadership coach and mentor. So I'm trying to use those skills in the third phase of my career. But what I haven't told you, leadership is not about your social background. So it's very easy looking at these pictures of me with lots of gold, lots of uniforms and lots of medals. But leadership's not about your social background. So I came from a working class background and I'm incredibly proud of that. It's not where you went to school. I went to a comprehensive school. It's not how many exams you passed. I was pretty rubbish at exams. I always had to work incredibly hard and always got really average results. And it's not succeeding in everything you do. I actually failed the first time I went and did my officer training because I wasn't fit enough. And leadership has consequences. It puts you in the spotlight. I whistle blew twice for the safety of my patients and to support my staff. It can be incredibly lonely. I've been bullied 3 and 4 times throughout my entire career. It makes you very vulnerable and you can't share that with your team. And it makes you doubt yourself. And I did and still struggle with the most terrible imposter syndrome. So as I said, I don't have time to sort of talk about what I think about leadership is today, but I would really like to leave you with 2 really, really quick nuggets, gold nuggets of leadership. And the first one is that the most brilliant and most rewarding thing about leadership is that it's all about people. Leadership is about service. It isn't about you and it's not about your personal agenda. It's all about people and it's about serving to lead. And as Rory Vaden says here, if serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. And my last nugget of gold that I'd like to leave you about leadership is that leadership is about it's about legacy, building legacy and leaving something in people, not for people and not in memory of them, but leaving something in people. And if you successfully achieve this, then you actually start to create the leaders of the future. And leaders are responsible for actually growing future leaders. My final slide is I often get asked what advice I would give to my 25-year-old young self. And this quote is a quote that my team gave me when I actually left Birmingham. And I don't think you can go far wrong. And this is like my raison d'etre and from about leadership. So excellence is the result of caring more than others think is wise, risking more than others think is safe, dreaming more than others think is practical, and expecting more than others think is possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Teresa. That was absolutely wonderful. I mean, there's so many highlights in there. I don't know how you get to choose between them all. And I mean, really, really incredible career history, your journey, the challenges you've gone through. You talked there about raising issues of safety and bullying and all that. So that thing of kind of personal resilience really came through for me. I just wondered if I might be able to ask you a question. You're a NED, and that's something that we hear a lot about. But can you maybe just tell people on the call what a NED is and what it is you do in your role, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a non-executive director, you're part of the board, so you have equal responsibility for the decisions of that board. But the role of the NED is to provide that independent voice. And NEDs are there to challenge, to scrutinise, but I also believe they're there to support and to celebrate. And I don't think we do that enough in the NHS. The NHS is a very difficult place, or sometimes I think more difficult than being in the military. And I don't think the NHS celebrates as much as it could do or should do some of its successes. So I try to make sure that's balanced, but it's being that independent voice. It's about, and you have to triangulate that. So I spend a lot of time going out and about and talking to people, because you can't know what's going on by just sitting in the boardroom and reading papers. So I spend my whole time trying to triangulate what I hear, what I see with what comes across the board.
Excellent, and that visible leadership was really apparent in your role there, and in the examples you gave, which was really fascinating. And you mentioned there what was the kind of tip for your younger self, which I think is a really great takeaway. What would you say if there were women on the call in particular looking for their next role? And there's often this thing about people talk about self-limiting beliefs. What would you say to kind of maybe overcome some of those things, Teresa?
I think it's a really, really good question. I think it's about believing in yourself, because it's very easy to sort of talk yourself out that you don't actually have those skills. So it's about actually challenging yourself out of your comfort zone. And it's really good to challenge yourself, because, and if you feel uncomfortable, then it means that, eventually you'll get to a point where you're comfortable and you can challenge again. But it's having the confidence. But I think it's also about identifying people that can mentor and support you in that journey. And again, I think that would be really helpful, in the NHS. And the one thing, if I could do in the NHS, is I would delete the word manager and manage, and I would put the word leadership and leader in, because it completely and utterly changes the narrative. So if you had, nurse leader, or, rather than nurse manager, or I'm managing the ward rather than I'm leading, it just completely changes the leader. But I think it's about having the courage, because leadership is about courage. Anyone can be a leader, I believe, if they want to be a leader. And it's not about leading great big armies. You all lead every single day. Looking after, a bay of patients is leading. You have to make decisions on behalf of those patients.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask you one final question, if I may, because this has been brilliant for me. You've obviously been in some really, really hairy situations, combat zones, all that kind of stuff. What would be the one thing you'd say to kind of keep your cool, or to kind of bring you back down to earth? Because we are going through a very, very difficult time in the world, in the country, within the NHS. What would be the one takeaway for you?
I think it's what I call about understanding and knowing what your moral compass is. So what it is that gets you out of bed, what motivates you. So for me, ever since I was a nurse in my first career in the NHS, it was my patients and my people. And for me, if I had an awful day or I was having to make awful decisions, I always put those two things at the center of my decision making. And then it made things much easier. And even if you made the wrong decision, I could sit in front of you and said, at that time, I put my people, I put my patients, I did the best that I possibly could in the context that I possibly could. And I don't think you can really go far wrong with that.
That's a really, really good point. Thank you. As I say, we've got a couple of things coming in the sidebar. So Rebecca's just popped in the sidebar. She's from Leeds and Yorkshire Partnership, saying thank you for sharing your story. Really inspiring what you've shared and the impact you've had on so many people. And I couldn't agree more. What I might do though, Therese, if you're all right, is I might say we'll take some questions at the end, if that's okay from you, because I know you're really generous with your time. And so if we can ask colleagues to pop any questions in the sidebar there, that'd be brilliant. But what I'll do is I'll move on to our next speaker, my colleague Tracy, who's going to talk in a moment about her own career. And you may see some parallels there, but I won't spoil the surprise of Tracy speaking. But what I will do before we move on is just kind of signpost people to some of the comms that have been coming out from the ICB within the system around International Women's Day. There's some really inspiring stories and profiles of women within the health and social care system, but also from the Northeast and North Cumbria in particular. So I'd really encourage you to go and check those out and share those with your colleagues, because there's definitely some really, really inspirational women that we work with now, but even historically, who I don't think have been recognised for their contribution to, in particular, Northeast North Cumbria and the health and social care system. So, I'd really encourage you to check those things out. But I just want to thank Teresa again for her time. And I really look forward to coming back to you. So get thinking about what those questions are. Feel free to pop them in the sidebar, and we'll try to get through as many as possible with Teresa a bit later on. So if I can just come to you, Tracy. Tracy is very lucky to work with Tracy Smith, who works within our team within the Northeast North Cumbria Integrated Care Board. I won't take up too much of Tracy's intro, because she's obviously going to talk about it. But we're incredibly lucky to have Tracy here. She's done some fantastic work in other parts of the NHS, and she's only recently joined us in the ICB. So Tracy, I'm going to hand over to you, who's opposite me, funny enough. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Hamid. Hopefully everybody can see me now. I'm obviously filling in at short notice because of other speakers. However, I wasn't fully prepared. I was hoping we would be fine with other speakers. So really, I mean, what can I say? Following Teresa's talk, absolutely fantastic, and it's truly inspiring for me to see, a fellow ex-service person with such a great story. My story isn't as decorated or as operational as Teresa's. However, it's that's where I ultimately started, and I think I've probably got a few things in common with Teresa. The fact that, yes, I came from a kind of working class family. I wasn't very good at exams and such like, and coming from a small town in the Northeast, I was encouraged to look further afield, get yourself out there. So you know, I look towards the armed forces. I had an elderly neighbour who had served in the Women's Air Corps or something like that, the WAFs, as an elderly neighbour, and she, you know, she told me stories of her time travelling and meeting lots of other women in her position, and that's that kind of encouraged me. So yeah, so like I say, today, because it is International Women's Day, you know, the events that we've had yesterday, today, and tomorrow, I think it's great to celebrate women in leadership roles. And our hashtag inspiring inclusion for the events. So just a little bit about me then. I joined the ICB in September 2023 after 6 years working in NHS England. I was a public health programmes coordinator and then was promoted to be a manager. So I was interested in this role as a workforce development officer, thinking, well, I've spent 6 years doing that. Again, as Teresa suggested, we move around a lot in the forces. So I think I was ready after 6 years. I was ready for a change. You know, I really liked my job in NHS England, but I just got itchy feet, and I was ready for that change to see what else I could get my teeth into. So this job here in the Health Equity and Inclusion team, knowing that it covered lots of things that, you know, we all think we should know, but I didn't really know that in depth. And having a sort of background around health inequalities and improving population health, I thought I've probably got some of the skills that's needed to do this role. So it was an opportunity to look at, you know, and understand the needs of the wider workforce and contribute to supporting the change where change is needed. The role has given me the opportunity, obviously, to become involved in a range of health and social care networks, which, you know, has broadened my my knowledge and experience, particularly with our voluntary sector partnerships. You know, and I'm starting to meet a lot more people, not from the areas that I originally knew. So, you know, it really is opening my eyes to some of the other different areas within the health and social care agendas. I've seen over the years how important it is to equip our workforce with the skills and the knowledge to be able to identify factors that influence a person's health. So, and I think this in turn will help support patients and communities to make any changes that'll benefit their health, not just what their issue is, you know, what the illness is. So at the moment, my role is focused on creating a healthier and fairer learning academy. I'm trying to take forward a virtual space that the workforce is going to be able to tap into using our Boost network, which you've probably heard about. Our Boost is our ICS's learning and improvement community. So anybody can get on there and have a look at what learning is available. We should be hopefully launching the Learning Academy pretty soon, so please keep an eye out for that. So I am committed to supporting and listening to the workforce, again, understanding where are the gaps in your learning, where are the gaps in being able to deliver better services and care to your patients. That, you know, that is what I'm focused about, and to make sure that, you know, we have a great place to work across the North East and North Cumbria. So just touching on some of my service career, like I say, not as decorated as Teresa. However, I originally joined the Women's Royal Naval Service, age 17. I'd finished college and I thought, I'm not cut out for university at this point. So I went and signed up and was successful and got a train from Darlington Station down to Plymouth and joined HMS Raleigh, where I started my basic training into the Women's Royal Naval Service as a radar operator. So I was like I say, I spent my time from 1989 to 2012, had a range of jobs, managed to progress through the rank system. I obviously wasn't an officer, where obviously Teresa was. I was at more of the non-commissioned officer ranks. However, I managed to progress and achieve the rank of Chief Petty Officer, which, you know, is pretty commendable, I guess, particularly back then when you think of you know, the Royal Navy was very much a man's place to work. The Women's Royal Naval Service was disbanded back in 1993, so we were forced to become part of the Royal Navy and meet their come under their sort of terms of service, which, you know, back then I didn't know any difference, so I just ploughed on with it. However, you know, I found myself in a range of roles, taking up some leadership roles, departmental manager roles, you know, which has really made me who I am today. I do find I've been quite resilient in lots of opportunity, you know, lots of experiences. I think during my time in the forces, I'd like to talk about some of the changes that we saw, you know, when you think of the 80s and the 90s. So, for example, during my time, women were obviously given the opportunity to serve at sea. So that was a massive change. You know, it was prior to 1990, it was only men who went to sea. So opening up lots of new roles and opportunity for women was a great thing. By the time that had embedded, and you know, women were clearly making the way forward at sea and on warships, they changed the rules for women to be able to have children. So prior to 1991, if you wanted to have children, you had to leave, you had to give up your career and swap it for motherhood, which you know, back then I knew what I was signing up for. However, when that changed, I thought that's great, and it did give me the opportunity to go on and have children and remain in the Royal Navy. As I say, the Wrens were disbanded, so terms and conditions were sort of forced upon us. And then later on, and again, this is probably a subject that is quite close to home because of the friends who I lived with. Same-sex relationships were finally allowed in the armed forces, and that's all of the armed forces, not just the Navy. So they called it the gay ban. The gay ban was lifted in the year 2000. Prior to that, you know, if people were found to be gay, they could be dishonorably discharged, which back then it was pretty awful. And I've got close friends who actually went through that process and still feel very, you know, very, very sad about it, about what happened back then. However, you know, I do know that those sorts of things have only been improved people's sort of experiences, people's opportunities to be able to serve in the armed forces. I did witness and experience on occasion, you know, lots of cases of prejudice, bullying, discrimination, harassment, and even abuse at times, which, you know, I do know did have a profound impact on a lot of service and ex-service personnel at the times and their families. I'm pleased to say that, you know, those times that have moved on, probably not perfect, but they have moved on, and you know, I think things are much better. I'd like to advocate that change will improve equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. You know, we have to change, we have to move with the times. So to give that opportunity for a welcome and happy work-life balance. So change is inevitable. It usually comes with improvements, but I would encourage people to speak out if they do feel that there's any unjust practice, or if you know, they see anything that does need changing, that they should speak about it, or, you know, to go to your line managers, to colleagues, etc. I think it was a great welcome to see the Armed Forces Covenant duty come into play. I know I'm part of some of the working groups across our system now that we're looking at some of these subjects to see how we can work together as a system and offer any further improvements and support to armed forces and their families, whether it's the workforce or our patients. And also, I'm pleased that the NHS recruitment process has changed. I left the armed forces, like I say, as a chief petty officer, which is about middle management for the non-commissioned ranks. And sadly, I couldn't get a job straight away with the NHS. You know, I kept getting told, you haven't got NHS experience. I ploughed on and I took a job at a band 2 level. Just because that was all I was being offered at the time. However, I took it. I had a young family at the time, and you know, it was ideal for me. And fortunately for me, I was, you know, it was identified I had a lot more skills that I could offer. probably at a higher grade. So I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, and took a higher banding job literally within months of me starting with the NHS. So that's me really, is, as part of my sort of career journey, I've gone from one career to another. I've been in the NHS now for 12 years. I'd like to think I've made, headway in some of the roles that I've done. I've been a programme manager for the bowel cancer screening programme in County Durham and Darlington. That was my first major role, so which I thoroughly enjoyed, and then moved on to NHS England as a public health programmes manager, supporting those big screening and immunisation programmes. Now I'm in the health equity and inclusion team. I really would like to make a difference in things, particularly for the workforce, and develop the workforce further. And that is me. Thank you. I'd like to take any questions if anybody's got any.
Thank you, Tracy. That was brilliant, and thank you very much for stepping in as well. Just shows how flexible and capable you truly are, and that was demonstrated by your career as well. So, Philippa, welcome, Philippa from South Tyneside. She said a really great presentation, great to hear reflections on same-sex couples and the progress, but like the NHS, there's still a real way to get to inclusion, which I couldn't agree with more. Tracy, if I can ask you, I mean, you mentioned about some of the changes in kind of terms and conditions and the treatment of women in particular in the workforce within the Navy. What would be your kind of defining moment for you that you sort of thought, wow, we finally made it, we've got equality for women, or is there still more to do you think in the Navy in particular?
So I think during that time when same-sex relations were brought in, it was probably more difficult for for men in the Royal Navy, because they were living on ships, they were living in close quarters, and I think they perhaps struggled at times to for those people who weren't gay, to get their heads around that they would be sharing accommodation with these people. I think one thing that distinctly stands out for me was this was led from the top, which was good to see. We had what we call in the forces a clear lower deck with a 3-line whip. You all have to turn up, you all have to be there and listen to what at the time it was the Second Sea Lord who came to visit our establishment, and basically setting out, this is what the change is, this is how I expect everybody to behave, and that bullying and harassment wouldn't be tolerated, things like that. So having it led from the top was great. However, being in a position, I think, of authority at that time, I think I had some responsibility. I was probably a leading hand by that point. Being able to be that advocate and actually challenge people when you saw people discussing things untoward or some of the poor behaviour, having to challenge that, I think, was difficult, especially as coming from the Women's Royal Naval Service into the Royal Navy. I actually didn't serve at sea. I got the opportunity to, do you want to serve at sea or not? And I chose not to. Thankfully, for me, it worked for me. A lot of my friends did go to sea, and I think did come across some rubbish behaviour, I think, back in those early days. It did become better, but I think, having been that advocate and being that champion and actually shouting it out and challenging anybody who continued with that poor behaviour, for anybody who was anybody who was gay, I just thought, yeah, that's great. So that was really a pivotal time for me. I think being able to be part of that, seeing the changes, and as I say, it's not perfect, but it did change, and we have to move forward with that.
Thank you, Tracy. And I'm going to ask you I'm on mute. There we are, classic. I'm going to ask you the other question I had in mind, Tracy. So we've talked about this in the theme of International Women's Day, about who's actually inspired you. And before I put that question to you, which woman has inspired you, I should say, I'm just going to ask Karen to just get ready. So Karen Garner's joining us as our next speaker. So Karen, if you can just get yourself ready, we'll bring you on in just 1 second. But Tracy, who's inspired you as a woman? Was it maybe in the forces, or just generally?
I think if there's any one person, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's probably my mum who's inspired me. I think coming from a deprived area in the northeast, a pretty working class background, single parent family, I think with me and 2 brothers, have been raised by my mum. I think my mum sort of showed us that you know, it just work hard, it'll work out. There's nothing that you can't do. You know, you can move forward, and if that means moving away from home and leaving me, which she, you know, reminds me on occasionally, but you know, you left home at 17 and I didn't see you for months, but she said that's what you've got to do. Absolutely, go and see the world. So I think my mum's been my biggest inspiration in all of this.
That is good enough for me. Mums are great, so we should celebrate them more. And thank you, Tracy. And you're also a great mum as well. So I'm going to come to Karen, if that's all right. Karen, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Karen, I'm going to give you a very quick intro, if that's all right, and then I'm going to throw you in at the deep end because we're conscious of time. But thank you very much for joining us. And I think you're joining in from not at work, if I'm not mistaken, potentially. So thanks for making time, especially out of your on the day off. You've had a really, really long career in the ambulance service, which is fantastic. And I think it was 37 years, I think it is. Obviously, you joined when you were incredibly young, I'm guessing. So I'm not going to hold on too much longer, but I'll throw you into the deep end if that's all right, Karen. But any questions, chat them in the sidebar, and when Karen wraps up, we'll take them from there. Thank you, Karen. Over to you.
Thank you. So I am at work today, believe it or not. I know they look like wardrobes behind me, but they're not. That is the cupboards in my office, so I am actually at work. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate it. And as you've already said, I have had a very, very long career. I joined the ambulance service in 1986 when I was just 17 as a cadet. And when I joined all the way back then, things were very, very different. So there was only about 6 women in the whole organisation at the time, most of them in traditional roles, as they probably would have been thought of then. So we didn't have any paramedics at all, even in the UK then, but we didn't have any women on the front line or anything like that. So it was a bit of a shock for some people when we started to trickle through. So, you know, there were lots of differences back then for me. So we weren't allowed the same uniform, for example, as men. So I had to wear a pencil skirt on the road. I didn't have any safety shoes like they did. I didn't have the same, there was no facilities at any of the ambulance stations. There was only men's facilities. However, you know, that I knew that when I joined, and that was what it was. And I think, and I know none of you do know me, but if you do know me, I'm quite a stubborn and determined individual. So I didn't let any of that bother me or put me off, and actually thought perhaps I can change some perceptions, because I did face quite a few behaviours from both patients and colleagues. So patients who were very astounded to see a woman on an ambulance and felt that I wouldn't be able to lift them or carry them or move them, but also from male colleagues who also didn't think that a woman would be capable of doing that job. However, I managed to progress and eventually completed all of my training and my paramedic course eventually when it became available, and became a paramedic. And by then there was maybe about 15 or 20 women working operationally, so a few more of us as allies. I got pregnant in 1991 with my first child, my son, Connor, and at the time the trust didn't even have a maternity policy, so they didn't know what to really do with me. Some really funny facts are that one of my male managers, well, they were all male managers, got his wife to make a green smock for me to wear for the entirety of my pregnancy, which was quite funny. And then when I was finished with it, I had to hand it back so they could hand it on to whoever else might get pregnant. So that was quite amusing at the time. But, you know, lots of things that were difficult for me at the time. I only got 6 weeks maternity leave with my first child, but I got a whole 9 weeks with my second child. So I felt really fortunate that I got 9 weeks off work. There was no flexibility in work then, so there was no opportunities to work part-time or have any flexible options. So it was really, really difficult. And back then in 1991, there was also no real childcare facilities to help me work in shifts, etc. So there was lots of things I decided I was going to do. One of those was to change the childcare issue. So I set up a little collaborative with other parents, so nurses, people who work shifts, policemen, who of children who went to the local nursery, and we all started this little childcare collaborative, and it's called Cramlington Kids Club, and it's still open today. So it was set up as a charity, and we ended up, I got some grants from the Lloyds TSB Foundation and the National Lottery, and we managed to get some room in the schoolyard, and we put a building in there, and it's just gone from strength to strength, and that's fantastic. So that was great for me, because I was able then to get my children looked after to allow me to carry on working and carry on my journey. And then I was really, really fortunate, because despite us applying for a leadership role, so a station officer it was called then, role 6 times, I hadn't been successful, and there was no other women in any leadership role in the organisation. So I knew it was going to be a tough crowd. But me being me, I didn't stop applying, I kept applying. And eventually, my manager at the time said he was going to give me a chance. And I got promoted to a station manager. And that in itself brought lots of challenges, because I was then managing a station full of male colleagues who, you know, some needed a little bit of gentle persuasion about being managed by a girl. However, again, you know, things were always getting a little bit easier. We had the same uniform then, we had better maternity policies, and all of my experiences that I'd faced, the further I progressed, I was able to influence. So I was able to influence childcare policies, introducing flexible working opportunities, so part-time shift patterns for people in similar positions who wanted to have a bit more flexibility to be able to have a family and a career. These all sort of happened over, you know, over time and over a period of time, and eventually continued to progress through my career to where I am now, the Assistant Director of People. And I'm really fortunate. I feel really fortunate, because I think I've been able to influence opinions. I've been able to influence policies and direction, and the fact that this is a job that women can do, and we can be really good at it. And actually, if you look at our board, we have 75% of our board are female, which is amazing. Senior manager posts, we have more women than we do men. And actually our workforce is now 55% female, which I'm just, you know, absolutely, I just think it's absolutely amazing. And the things that we have in place, I feel like I've been able to influence some of it, pave the way, take some of the hard knocks so that it doesn't happen at all now. And I feel completely supported and included in my workforce now. I don't think my gender is at all an issue, which it was before. And I think for me, I feel in a really privileged position, because I've been able, I always feel like when you are allowed to go and treat patients, it's quite a privileged occupation anyway, but being in the position I'm in now and being able to influence change and make things more inclusive and call out anything that still could be improved, for me is a fantastic achievement, I think. Very similar to Tracy, in that I, you know, came from a very ordinary background in a very traditional family where my mum stayed at home and my dad went off to work, and my brother went off to university, but I didn't, because why would a girl want to go to university, to coin my father's comments at the time. So I think I'm really fortunate, and the NHS has given me a fantastic career. It's given me loads of opportunity for development and education, and I'm just really grateful. I think, you know, it's given me resilience, it's made me more determined. So that's me, and that's who I am.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Karen. That was really, really interesting. And it's just reflecting on how some of these things that you've spoken about, Tracy's spoken about, and Teresa spoke about are all in recent memory. It's incredible to think within my lifetime that, you know, people had to get uniform made for them and then pass it around to the next person, or no flexible working arrangements, or, you know, some of the prejudice you face, you know, the unacceptable behaviour. It's just incredible to think that, and it's a testament to all three of you how brilliant you are as individuals, that you've not only put up with that, gone beyond it, but then you've flown in your careers as well. So really, really lovely, to hear from you all on that. I'm just going to take a couple of questions. I know we're conscious of time. I'm going to be really rude and maybe ask you to stay on a tiny bit longer than we planned to, if that's all right, because there's some really wonderful questions. And I know there was a particularly interesting question I saw there about kind of behaviors and what have you. So feel free to come on the line, all of you. There was stuff there kind of about how do you challenge that poor behavior. It was from Michaela Davenport. How do you challenge poor behavior and whistleblowing? She says, I feel very strongly this is encouraged, but the reality sometimes on the ground, brackets not in leadership, is it can take you to a not nice place. How did you cope with this? So who would like to go first on that? Do you want to go first, Teresa or Karen?
I'm happy to just give my perspective. I mean, it's difficult. It is difficult, but I think, I remember walking into my first meeting as a manager, as a girl, and the room was full of men, and I had a handbag. I mean, that I was a lady, and I had my handbag. And the first thing I was met with, and it still sticks in my mind now, was, God, I never thought I'd see the day where a manager in the ambulance service carried a handbag. So that was the first comment that I got at the time. And how did I deal with that? It does make you sort of think, okay, you're on the back foot a little bit. But actually, my way of responding to that in my head is, I've been really successful in my career, and so comments like that haven't held me back. And I did comment back to that person. I did say something to that person, but I think what I will also say is, that same reaction, the fact that same reaction isn't visible today for me is fantastic. And so things are changing. I think we still have a way to go, and there's still things that we need to improve, and be able to challenge things is the best way. The best way to do it is to challenge it at the time and be strong enough to do it.
Great point, Karen. Teresa?
Thank you. I'll mention the whistleblowing bit, because I think it's a really great question, and we all encourage it, but it takes real courage and bravery. The two things are very different. I whistleblew twice in my career. Once when I was younger, it nearly broke me, and I ran away. I got the opportunity to go to a new place, so I took it, because I didn't feel that I'd raised the issue. On both occasions that I whistleblew, what incensed me and made me so sad was that the leadership already knew about them and hadn't done anything about it, which completely incensed me. So the second time I whistleblew was when I was very, very, very senior as a group captain and commanding officer. And I whistleblew because it was affecting my patient's safety and my staff's safety. And I knew what the consequences were going to be. But they effectively closed this medical centre without any investigation. And when I read the email, there was a doctor who'd said that this medical centre, which she was in charge of, should have been closed months ago. So instead of just leaving it, it double incensed me. So I then went back to the top and basically, and I couldn't order because I was subordinate, but I absolutely stated that I wanted a full investigation of, if she'd known it was unsafe, how could she have allowed my patients and my people to be put at risk? And I was told, how dare you as a nurse, challenge a doctor? So that incensed me a third time. So by that point, I wrote an absolute thing, and I wrote it to our Surgeon General to the top of the tree. But it was incredibly lonely. And I remember sitting at 4 o'clock one afternoon after this, sitting there with nobody to go to. But I've got 2 dogs, and that was one of the answers to the other questions. So I'm very bad at looking after my own health, but I got a dog when I was commanding officer called Wolfie from Transylvania, and I now have Simba from Cyprus, and they are my resilience and they are my mental health. And my mum also was always there. She didn't always get it, but she could give you a perspective, just like Tracy said.
Thank you. And just moving on to the next question, just want to say hi to Jackie. We know you're here, Jackie, but we're just in the Q&A, so we're going to get you back at the next event, Jackie. And Jackie's our menopause lead in the ICB. If you haven't met Jackie already, she does some brilliant work on that too. So we're just going to go to the question. I'm going to come to you first, Tracy, if that's all right. Rebecca has popped in here. It's addressed to Teresa, so I'll come to you next, Teresa, after Tracy, if that's all right, about imposter syndrome. So how do you keep moving forward when it kicks in? What are some of the things you did to sort of feel in control when the sort of the pressure of the role kicks in there? And
Okay,
how do
so
you keep leading others? Go ahead,
I've got
Teresa.
some bad news for you. It doesn't go away. You never get rid of it completely. It's always there. Even today at 12 o'clock, my perfectionism and everything else is something which is part of my control thing, my controls system, and my imposter syndrome kicks in. It doesn't go away. What I've spent the last couple of years doing is learning to accept it. Perfectionism is part of my imposter syndrome, so I always feel that I have to deliver 110%, and that's part of working in a male-dominated environment. I always felt I had to be not equal to the men that I worked with, but 10-20% more. So I was always working harder, and it's a very dangerous vicious circle from a mental health perspective. So I've tried to personally accept that Teresa Griffiths' 80% is probably higher than most other people, so it will get by. So I'm trying to sort of not be quite such a perfectionist. And I've also, in the last sort of 12 months, found my own coach. So I meet regularly with a coach to talk about issues, how I can manage in my new roles.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm going to come to you, Tracy, about kind of breaking through imposter syndrome. How do you keep going there?
I think I've just put in the chat there. I think it is. I can mirror what Teresa's saying. You do. I think being in a man's world back then, it was. I always had to, feel like I had to work harder. Just that little bit more to be recognised, to be understood, and even some of the situations, like Karen was saying, going back to, I know it's slightly changing tack, but yeah, going back to when I got pregnant with my first child, I remember this is how policy just wasn't embedded. I got sent to go and do some training on that ship at like nearly 5 months pregnant, clearly showing. And I was fortunate, Karen, mine, to have a uniform. However, I got to a ship without thinking, because back then, the policies were for line managers, and I wasn't a line manager at the time. And I got sent to a ship, and fortunately for me, there was a woman who was the quartermaster on the gangway of this ship. A big warship, and she said, "You're not coming on my ship in that state." I said, "I beg your pardon, I'm here to do some training, I'm training the guys here." "No, there's been no risk assessment for you in your state to go down all them ladders down to the middle of the ship." And I just thought, oh my God, I never even thought about it, and neither did my manager, because he directed me to go and deliver training. So yeah, I do. I think there's I think at that point, when I knew it wasn't just me, it was my, I was, the fact that I was pregnant, and actually there's going to be a lot more ladies now, because now you can have children in the forces. I need to be an advocate for this and actually make sure that those risk assessments are conducted and the policy is shared out. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. And then just moving on, I'm going to come to you next, Karen. I think this will be a final question, given time we're running over ever so slightly, so that's my fault. And it's just a testament to the brilliant speakers that we all want to hear from them and ask them some further questions. So Nick's popped a comment in the sidebar, and she's heard a lot about the doggedness of individual pushing through the time when being a woman was a second class, almost like a second class citizen, and being instrumental in making a change and striving for equity. As a non-binary person, she says she recognizes that in herself, and it's very tiring. How do you keep up your energy and motivation and keep pushing through, please, Karen?
I think there has to be something within you, and I absolutely, listening to Teresa describe her as a person was like listening to her describe me as a person. You have to have something within you, determination to not let something else affect you and your journey. And it is tiring, and it can be exhausting and incredibly frustrating and upsetting, and it can affect your mental health, because you're not, if you feel like you're not pushing at an open door all of the time and the door's always closed. But what I can say is I can't make you have that determination and put up with it. But what I would say is, please don't ever give up. because when I think back to 37 years ago and you know what I had as an organisation, what I was faced with versus what I've got today, and I'm not saying it's going to take you 37 years either, by the way, but all I would say is you've got to believe in yourself, because you can achieve anything, and I feel like I'm testament to that. Nobody back then would have ever said that I would have been here and I would have done what I've done, and the role model I've been for my children is something I'm incredibly proud of. So keep pushing, be determined, and lean on the people who can help you. So people like Teresa and Tracy and me, and no doubt other people in your organisation who can be an ear and be a sounding board and give you the encouragement that you need, because you know you sound like you want to carry on and keep pushing.
Brilliant message, thank you. I'm just going to quickly say, if you look at the feedback form that Anna's posted and Tracy just signposted there, if you can fill that in before you leave, that'd be wonderful, just to help us understand what you'd like to see from future events. Just give us some honest feedback, that'd be wonderful. Teresa, I'm going to come to you next about how do you keep going in difficult times?
Yeah, very similar to what Karen said, and I've already mentioned, is about understanding and knowing what your raison d'etre is, what motivates you to get out of bed every morning. And it's really lucky if it's really strong like mine was. Mine was always my people, and it was always my patients. And I was able to look at myself in the mirror at night and say I was able to do my best. But I think as you go through, it's about taking experience. So one of my experiences was that I now look back on and reflect on when I'm wavering, is that I was selected. It's through a massive competition to go to something called Advanced Staff College, which only 300 officers go, and they choose you because you're supposed to be the top future leaders of the Ministry of Defence. When I attended in 2013, there were 300 attendees and only 17 women, and you're then measured into top third, middle third, and bottom third. And I knew on day one, didn't matter what I did, because I was a nurse and because I was a female, I'd always been the bottom third. And guess what? I came in the bottom third. But instead of sulking like all my colleagues and the boys did, I embraced it. And in the very last term, we were asked to do a presentation of our roles, because we were very operationally focused. My imposter syndrome just kicked in, because these were like warship drivers, they were fast jet pilots, they were tank drivers, they were these people who were absolutely phenomenal in my mind. And I was the nurse, having just come from Birmingham. And I went first, and the directing staff, who was a lieutenant colonel, was like, I don't really know what you've got to say. And I was like, okay, rightio. So I practiced. I went in the dark and I practiced, and I told my story, and I used their language. And I also, at the end, shared the poem that I'd written, but I didn't say that I'd written it, but they knew that I had. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I got the standing ovation, and people still talk about that 10 minutes now. We had ministers, we had top, speakers from all over over the world come to talk to us. And people came to me saying, I'm so sorry, I've spent the last year not talking to you because you were a nurse. And I wish, it's my fault, I wish I had spoken to you. So I use that as a bit of a crutch now to reflect back on and think, actually, no, there is more.
Thank you, Teresa. I think that's a great point to finish on. Maybe next time we can hear the poem, if you don't mind sharing with you, but if we're lucky. But just to say, really, really tremendous thanks from me. There's lots of really wonderful feedback in the sidebar from Joe Fairley, from Kate Haddart, from Kieran Eves, just saying how much they've enjoyed it, how they found it inspiring, and the fact that we've been able to stop and pause and listen to you has been really wonderful. And I just want to thank you again for your time, Teresa, Tracy, and Karen. It's been really a great session for me, just being part of the conversation, and it's great to know that there's such inspirational women working within our system and supporting each other, but also supporting others in developing their career as well. So just very finally, if I can just say, pop a bit of feedback in for us, that'd be wonderful, and we'll see you at the next event in the coming weeks. Thank you very much. See you all soon. Thanks a lot. Happy International Women's Day.